Okay, my name is Boyce Blackmon. I was not born. I was born in Manatee County, but I did not spend my entire life here. I did live in Florida my entire life, but I always had relatives in this area, so we visited here a lot. Probably the most predominant thing in my mind, I guess, is visiting here from when I was a kid. Was again our picnics along the causeway, going out to Longboat Key, and getting all the scallops and everything, and having a family with 40, 50 people along the causeway there all day long, and cooking swamp cabbage and frying fish, and the kids playing in the water, and and that type of thing. But that's without a doubt one of the most interesting things, or fascinating things I remember about this area from my childhood. Fishing, we did mostly was freshwater fishing, but we did do some saltwater fishing, but not as we didn't have boat facilities or anything. So it was kind of, you had to fish off a bridge or wade or something like that. But I remember oysters and scallops and everything and of course that's what the Indians lived off of too. But yeah, that's the biggest thing I remember, as a kid here. The Carlton Preserve, I took a lot of pictures out there, and one of them, especially since you're interested in the water resources, one series of 3 pictures I have are from the Carlton, where there were in the 60s and 70s, there was a lot of water out there, a lot more than there is today, and a lot more than there's been since then, except for short periods. And these pictures are of some what we call curlews that were on a wetland out there, which were pretty typical, where you drive up in a buggy, or if you're walking through the woods and you come up on a pond, you could hear these curlews out there, ibises, white ibises is what they are, and they'd make these little grunting noises like and there'd be thousands of them on this pond, and you walk up and they would panic and fly up in the air about 10 feet and just hover, and then after things calm down, they just settle right back down in the water. One day I walked up on a little pond inside of a big hammock, and I could hear them, for a long ways, making those noises. And when I got up there, they kept doing it in cycles. And when I got up there, I found what it was. There was a pond that was about as big as, maybe twice as big as my house. And it was surrounded by thick woods, and there was a big hawk. And he was up in the trees on one side, and he would dive. And when he would dive, they would all fly up in the air for about 5 feet and hover until he got to the other side, and then they'd go back down. And this went on, it was like a game, he kept going back and forth, and they kept jumping up in the air, but it would go over about a 2 or 3 minute cycle, over and over and over. I thought it was the most humorous thing. Some of the things like that, you just wish you had it on video or something so you could show the world, because it's neat. But the water resources have certainly dwindled in my lifetime. From during the 60s and 70s, I could really notice it on the Carlton because it's pretty much unaffected by surrounding development or anything. I mean, it's such a large tract of land, and it's protected on two sides by Myakka State Park. So it just doesn't have detrimental influences on it by development anywhere. And I watched the water levels go from average of one thing way down to nothing. We would catch 5-pound bass in Deer Prairie Slough in the 60s and 70s, and there hadn't been a fish in that thing now in probably 40 years because it dries up every year. And that's long-term weather effects. That's not from development. But anyway, that was an interesting thing. Mode of transportation, of course, I had the ranch as well. And I was never a horse person. So my horse was my ATV, which I started out with 3-wheelers, then wound up with with the four-wheel ATVs. And then for the ranch work, as well as traveling through the Carlton, we used swamp buggies. And my favorite was an old Volkswagen buggy that we had made out of a Volkswagen bus. And it was a little short thing, lightweight, very quiet, easy to steer, very dependable. And we put a lot of miles on that thing, both at the ranch and out at the Carlton. This was a picture of an aerial picture that I took of the ranch, which was 440 acres at Cowpen Lane. That was named after the ranch. And I dug out a few pictures of some of the cattle. We started out in the commercial cattle business, and we were working cows in that picture in the cow pens. And this is part of the commercial herd, and I was just getting started into raising Brahmas, purebred Brahma cattle. And this is the Brahma, some of my Brahma cows. This is what this one here. This bull was one of the prize bulls that I raised. I showed him in several county fairs and everything throughout the state. John McCarthy, who is, I don't know what his position is now, but he keeps moving up. He asked me to lunch one day and asked me if I would be interested in attending a survey, a meeting of a group of people. It was about 30 of us, I guess, 25, 30. Environmentally oriented people, and I, being in the cattle business at that time, was part of that too. They started this group, and they started discussing ways to help the county maintain these properties and keep them in the forefront of everyone's mind. And the Friends of the Sarasota County Parks was born. For the last 6-7 years, there have been no employees at the at the Carlton Preserve. It's all been run by Friends of the Carlton. And it's great that we have that kind of volunteerism, but I think it imposes a pretty big burden on those people to keep these facilities going. That's a huge facility, and it's a big responsibility. So I think we need a little more help in that regard in operating these Friends of the Parks, instead of depending on the volunteers entirely. Everything kind of flows from one thing to the next, and I've still got one more phase to go. It's total retirement. And we're trying to plan for that because nobody lives forever. Even though so far so good, but there will be an end at some point. So we're planning on our next life, which will be much more compact, let's say, and less intensive lifestyle and all that kind of stuff. But we really hate to lose this. To leave this place. This is paradise. This is what it's all about. This is old Florida. This is where the Indians chose to camp. So it's my friends like Rodney Potter, he says, you live right next to heaven, and I believe that.